Steve Harvey had been hosting Family Feud for 12 years. He thought he had seen every possible surprise the show could throw at him. Emotional reunions, unexpected victories, and heartwarming moments had all become part of his daily routine. But on this particular Thursday afternoon in April 2024, something would happen that would shake him to his core and remind him why he loved what he did. If you enjoy stories about justice, family, and second chances, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel because what you are about to hear will restore your faith in humanity. The studio was packed with an energetic audience. Two families stood ready to compete: the Morrison family from Texas and the Chen family from Oregon. Both families brought their enthusiasm and competitive spirit to the stage. The game had been going smoothly, with the Morrisons leading by a comfortable margin. Steve was in his element, delivering his trademark humor and keeping the energy high. Everything seemed perfectly normal until the third round of questions began. Steve approached the podium to read the next survey question when something unusual happened. A man in his late 50s stood up from the audience. He was wearing a simple blue button-down shirt and khaki pants. His face showed the weathered lines of someone who had lived through difficult times, but his eyes were bright with determination. He raised his hand and called out in a clear, firm voice, "Mr. Harvey, I need to speak with you. It is extremely important." The studio fell silent. Audience interruptions were not part of the script. Security guards immediately moved toward the man, but Steve held up his hand to stop them. Something about the man's demeanor made Steve pause. This was not the behavior of someone trying to cause trouble or seek attention. This was someone who had something urgent and meaningful to say. "Sir, we are in the middle of taping a show," Steve said, keeping his voice calm and respectful. "If you have something to discuss, you can speak with our producers after the show." The man shook his head firmly. "Mr. Harvey, this cannot wait. It concerns one of the contestants on your stage right now. What I have to say will change everything, and I have proof." The tension in the studio became thick. Steve glanced at the contestants. Marcus Morrison, the family captain, had gone completely pale. His hands were gripping the podium so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. His wife Sarah placed a protective hand on his shoulder, her face filled with concern. The other Morrison family members looked confused and worried. Something was clearly wrong. Steve made a decision that went against every rule of television production. "All right, sir, come on down here. Let us hear what you have to say." The man walked down the aisle with quiet dignity. Each step seemed to carry weight. The audience watched in complete silence. When he reached the stage, he stood directly in front of Marcus Morrison. The two men locked eyes, and the emotion that passed between them was powerful and unmistakable. Marcus took a step back, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow. His family surrounded him, confused about what was happening. "My name is Robert Chen," the man said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. 23 years ago, Marcus Morrison saved my life. But he has never known the full impact of what he did that night. He has never known that his one act of courage changed the lives of dozens of people. I'm here today to make sure he finally knows the truth." Steve looked between the two men, his instincts telling him that something profound was about to unfold. "Marcus, do you know this man?" Marcus nodded slowly, tears already forming in his eyes. "I think so, but it was so long ago. I was just a kid. I did not think anyone even remembered." Robert reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. From it, he carefully extracted several photographs and documents, handling them as if they were precious treasures. He held up the first photograph for everyone to see. It showed a younger version of himself standing in front of a small grocery store. The sign above the door read, "Chen Family Market," in both English and Chinese characters. "This was my family's store in Houston," Robert explained. "We had owned it for 15 years. My parents had immigrated from Taiwan with nothing but hope and determination. They worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week to build that business. It was more than just a store to us. It was the embodiment of the American dream. It was proof that their sacrifice had been worth it." He held up another photograph. This one showed a happy family gathered around a dinner table. A younger Robert sat with his wife, his elderly parents, and 3 small children. Their faces glowed with warmth and love. "This was my family in the summer of 2001. My parents were in their 70s but still worked at the store every day. My wife helped with the books. My 3 children, ages 8, 6, and 4, would do their homework in the back room after school. We were not rich, but we were happy. We were building something meaningful together." Robert's voice grew heavier with emotion as he continued. "Then one night in September, everything almost ended. It was a Tuesday evening. The store was getting ready to close. My father was counting the register. My mother was sweeping the floor. I was in the back checking inventory. That is when 3 armed men burst through the door." The studio was completely silent. Even the camera operators had stopped moving. Everyone was frozen, waiting to hear what came next. They had guns, Robert continued, his voice cracking slightly. They demanded all our money. My father, who barely spoke English, tried to comply. He opened the register and gave them everything we had, about $400, but it was not enough for them. They wanted more. They started yelling, becoming more aggressive and violent. One of them grabbed my elderly mother and pushed her against the wall. She hit her head and fell to the ground. Marcus was crying openly now, but Robert continued his story, needing to finish what he had come to say. I heard the commotion from the back room and came running out. When I saw my mother on the floor bleeding, I lost my mind. I charged at the men without thinking. One of them turned and pointed his gun directly at my chest. I was 3 feet away from him. I saw his fingers start to squeeze the trigger. In that moment, I knew I was about to die. I thought about my wife and children. I thought about how they would grow up without a father. Everything moved in slow motion. Robert paused, wiping tears from his eyes. Steve stood beside him, completely absorbed in the story, his own eyes glistening with emotion. But then something miraculous happened. A teenager who had been shopping in the store, a young man I had never met before, came out of nowhere. He tackled the gunman from the side just as he fired. The bullet went into the ceiling instead of into my chest. That teenager then threw himself between me and the other armed men. He yelled for me to run and call the police. He put his own life at risk to save mine. Robert turned to face Marcus directly. That teenager was you, Marcus. You were 17 years old. You were buying bread and milk for your mother. You had no reason to get involved. You could have run out the door and saved yourself. But instead, you chose to save a stranger's life. You chose to protect my family. Marcus was shaking, tears streaming down his face. His family members were crying too, hearing this story for the first time. Sarah wrapped her arms around her husband, holding him tightly. The police arrived within minutes, Robert continued. The men ran away and nobody was killed. My mother had a concussion but recovered. The store had been damaged, but it could be repaired. And I was alive because of you. When the police asked me what happened, I told them about the brave young man who had saved my life. But in all the chaos, you had left before I could get your name. The police searched for you to give you a civilian commendation, but they could never find you. Steve turned to Marcus. Is this true? Why did you never tell anyone about this? Marcus wiped his eyes and took a deep breath. I was 17 and scared. After it happened, I just ran home. When I got there, I did not tell my parents what had happened because I knew they would be upset and worried. I tried to forget about it. I had nightmares for months. I kept seeing that gun pointed at Mr. Chen. I kept thinking about what could have gone wrong. I felt like maybe I had done something stupid and reckless. I never thought of myself as a hero. I just thought I had been a foolish kid who got lucky. Robert shook his head firmly. You were not foolish. You were extraordinary. And I have spent 23 years trying to find you so I could tell you what your courage meant, not just to me, but to everyone whose life you changed that night. He held up more photographs. Each one showed different people and different moments in time. Because I survived that night, I was able to watch my children grow up. This is my daughter Lisa on her wedding day. She is now a doctor who works with underprivileged communities. This is my son Michael graduating from law school. He now provides free legal services to immigrants. This is my youngest daughter Amy receiving her teaching award. She works in inner-city schools helping at-risk youth. Robert's voice grew stronger as he continued. None of these moments would have happened if you had not saved my life. My children would have grown up without a father. My wife would have raised them alone, probably losing the store in the process. My elderly parents would have lost their son. But because you acted with courage, 3 children got to have their father at every birthday, every graduation, every important moment of their lives. He pulled out more photographs, spreading them across the podium. And it goes even further than that. This is my grandson, David. He is 5 years old now. He exists because you saved my life. This is my granddaughter, Emma. She is 3. These children would never have been born if you had not stepped in that night. My daughter Lisa has saved hundreds of lives as a doctor. My son Michael has helped dozens of immigrant families navigate the legal system. My daughter Amy has educated and inspired countless children. All of that good in the world exists because you made one brave choice when you were 17 years old. The weight of Robert's words settled over the entire studio. Steve Harvey, a man known for his quick wit and humor, stood speechless. The audience was crying. The crew members behind the cameras had tears running down their faces. This was not entertainment anymore. This was a moment of profound human connection and truth. Marcus struggled to find words. I had no idea. I just did what I thought was right in that moment. I never thought about what happened after. I never knew if you were okay. I felt guilty for years, wondering if I had done enough. Robert stepped closer to Marcus and placed both hands on his shoulders. Did more than enough. You gave me 23 more years with my family. You gave my children their father. You gave my parents more time with their son. You changed the trajectory of multiple lives with one selfless act. That is the definition of a hero. Steve finally found his voice. Marcus, did your family know any of this? Marcus shook his head, looking at his wife and children. No, I never told them. I was ashamed that I had put myself in danger. I thought they would think I was reckless. Sarah, Marcus's wife, spoke up, her voice choked with emotion. Reckless? Marcus, you saved a man's life. You saved an entire family. How could we ever think that was wrong? Marcus's teenage son stepped forward. Dad, you are always telling us to do the right thing even when it is hard. You are always teaching us about courage and integrity. Now I understand why. You were not just talking about it. You lived it. Robert reached into his pocket again and pulled out an envelope. Marcus, I came here today not just to thank you, but to give you something. After that night, my family never forgot what you did. We kept the store running for 10 more years. Eventually, we were able to sell it and retire comfortably. But we always set aside money in a special fund. We called it the Guardian Angel Fund. It was money we saved specifically to thank you if we ever found you. He handed the envelope to Marcus. This contains a check for $50,000. It represents a small portion of what your act of courage meant to us. But more importantly, I want to make an announcement. My children and I have established a scholarship fund in your name at the University of Houston. The Marcus Morrison Courage Scholarship will provide full tuition for students who demonstrate exceptional bravery and service to their communities. Your legacy will now help hundreds of young people get an education. Marcus stared at the envelope, unable to process what was happening. I cannot accept this. I was just doing what anyone should do. Robert smiled through his tears. That is exactly why you deserve it. You think heroism is ordinary. You think putting others before yourself is just what people should do. That humility is what makes you truly extraordinary. Steve Harvey wiped his own tears and turned to address the cameras. Ladies and gentlemen, we have just witnessed something that goes far beyond a game show. We have seen what happens when one person's courage ripples out across decades, touching multiple generations. This is what real heroism looks like. It is not always loud or recognized in the moment. Sometimes it is a 17-year-old buying groceries who makes a split-second decision to protect a stranger. He turned back to Marcus and Robert. This show is about families, but today we have learned that family is more than just blood. Robert, you have spent 23 years searching for the man who saved your life. Marcus, you have spent 23 years carrying the weight of that night, thinking you did not do enough. Today, both of you can finally have peace. The studio erupted in applause. The audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation that lasted for several minutes. The two families on stage came together, embracing Marcus and Robert. Strangers united by an act of courage from more than 2 decades ago. Steve made an executive decision. We are going to pause the game right now. What matters today is not who wins or loses Family Feud. What matters is that we have all been reminded of something essential about human nature. We have been reminded that courage is real, that sacrifice matters, and that one good act can change the world in ways we never imagine. The producers scrambled to adjust the taping schedule, but nobody minded. This moment was more important than any game show format. Steve invited both families to sit down on the stage. For the next 30 minutes, Marcus and Robert talked about that night, filling in details that had been missing for so many years. Marcus learned that the 3 armed men had been caught 2 days after the incident and were still in prison. He learned that Robert's mother had fully recovered and had lived for another 15 years before passing away peacefully. He learned that the store had become a community gathering place where people felt safe because they knew the Chen family valued human life above profit. Robert showed Marcus pictures of his grandchildren and talked about how he told them bedtime stories about their family's guardian angel. He explained how the incident had shaped his entire family's values, teaching them that when you see someone in need, you act. You do not wait for someone else to help. You do not calculate the risks. You simply do what is right. Marcus, in turn, shared his own story. After that night, he had struggled with fear and anxiety. He had nightmares about the gun and the violence, but he had channeled that fear into something positive. He had become a counselor for at-risk youth, working with teenagers who were involved in or affected by violence. For the past 18 years, he had been helping young people process trauma and make better choices. He had never connected his career choice to that night in the store, but now the link seemed obvious. I guess that night never really left me, Marcus admitted. I thought I was running away from it by not talking about it. But actually, I was running toward helping others who had experienced similar trauma. You saved my life too, Mr. Chen. You gave my fear a purpose. The conversation continued, with both families sharing stories and building connections. Steve sat among them, occasionally asking questions but mostly just listening. This was one of those rare television moments where the best thing the host could do was get out of the way and let the real story unfold. Eventually, Steve stood up and addressed the audience and cameras one final time. "We started today thinking we were going to tape a normal episode of Family Feud, but life had other plans. Sometimes the universe brings people together exactly when they need to meet. Marcus Morrison, you spent 23 years thinking you had not done enough. Robert Chen, you spent 23 years searching for the man who saved your life. Today, you both found what you were looking for. You found peace, gratitude, and confirmation that goodness is real and lasting." He continued, his voice filled with emotion. "To everyone watching at home, this is your reminder that your actions matter. The kind things you do, the brave choices you make, the moments when you put others before yourself, all of it matters. You might never know the full impact of your goodness, but trust that it ripples out in ways you cannot imagine." Marcus had no idea that his 17-year-old self was creating a legacy that would span generations. He just did what he felt was right. That is all any of us can do. Steve turned to the camera with his characteristic directness. "If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of the power of courage and gratitude, make sure you hit that subscribe button and share this with everyone you know. The world needs more stories like this. The world needs to be reminded that heroes walk among us every day, often not even knowing they are heroes." The taping ended, but the story continued long after the cameras stopped rolling. The episode, when it aired, became one of the most watched in Family Feud history. The video went viral across every social media platform. News outlets picked up the story, interviewing both Marcus and Robert in depth. The Marcus Morrison Courage Scholarship Fund received donations from around the country, growing to a size that could help even more students than originally planned. Marcus and Robert became lifelong friends. Their families began spending holidays together, creating new traditions and memories. The Morrison children and the Chen grandchildren formed bonds, united by the story of courage that had brought their families together. Marcus finally began processing the trauma of that night with the help of professional therapy, something he had avoided for years. Robert finally released the guilt he had carried about not being able to properly thank his rescuer. In the months following the taping, Marcus received hundreds of letters from people who had been inspired by his story. Many were from people who had performed similar acts of courage, but had never been recognized. Others were from people who had been saved by strangers and wanted to share their gratitude. Marcus responded to each letter personally, creating a network of people connected by experiences of selfless bravery. The scholarship fund grew beyond anyone's expectations. Corporate sponsors came forward, moved by the story. Within a year, the fund had enough money to provide 10 full scholarships annually instead of the original 3. The selection committee, which included both Marcus and members of the Chen family, looked for students who demonstrated not just academic ability, but also a commitment to serving others and standing up for what is right. Steve Harvey kept in touch with both families. He featured updates on his talk show and continued to use their story as an example of how television could be a platform for meaningful human connection. He often said that in all his years of entertainment, few moments had affected him as deeply as watching Marcus and Robert embrace on the Family Feud stage. The original Chen family market location, though no longer owned by the family, installed a plaque commemorating the event that had taken place there. The current owners, who had heard the story after it went viral, wanted to honor both the courage shown that night and the values the Chen family had represented. The plaque read, "On this site in September 2001, a young man named Marcus Morrison demonstrated extraordinary courage by protecting strangers from harm. His selfless act reminds us that heroism is a choice we can all make. May this place continue to be a symbol of community, protection, and the power of doing what is right." Schools began using the story as a teaching tool. Ethics classes discussed the moral implications of Marcus's choice. Psychology courses analyzed the trauma and healing process both men experienced. Sociology departments examined how one act of courage created ripples across multiple generations and communities. The story became more than just a feel-good moment. It became a case study in how individual choices shape collective outcomes. 3 years after the Family Feud episode aired, Marcus was invited to speak at a national conference on violence prevention. In his speech, he finally articulated what he had learned from that night and from reuniting with Robert. "I used to think courage meant not being afraid," he said. "But I was terrified that night. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding. I thought I might die. Real courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to act despite the fear because something more important than your safety is at stake. That night, a family's life was at stake. The choice was clear, even if it was terrifying. He continued, "For 23 years, I carried shame about that night. I thought I had been reckless and foolish. I thought I had put myself in unnecessary danger. But when Robert found me and showed me the photographs of his children and grandchildren, I finally understood. I had not been reckless. I had been given an opportunity to save a life, and I had taken it. That is not something to be ashamed of. That is something to be grateful for. I am grateful that I was in that store. I am grateful that I made the choice to act. And I am grateful that Robert survived to build the beautiful life and family he has today." The speech received a standing ovation and was later published in several journals on ethics and psychology. Marcus, who had spent decades quietly helping at-risk youth without seeking recognition, suddenly found himself in the uncomfortable position of being a public figure. But he handled it with the same humility he had shown that night in the store. He redirected attention away from himself and toward the broader message about courage, community, and the lasting impact of our choices. Robert Chen also became an advocate for recognizing everyday heroes. He worked with local governments to create civilian recognition programs that honored people who had performed acts of courage in their communities. "Marcus would never have sought recognition," Robert explained in interviews. "That is exactly the kind of person we need to honor. The people who do the right thing without expecting anything in return. They are the true foundation of a healthy society." The relationship between the two families deepened over the years. When Marcus's daughter graduated from college, the entire Chen family attended the ceremony. When Robert's youngest grandchild was born, Marcus was named as an honorary grandfather. The families vacationed together, celebrated milestones together, and supported each other through difficulties. What had begun as a chance encounter in a store and an unexpected reunion on a game show stage had evolved into a chosen family bound by gratitude, respect, and love. As time passed, the story took on almost mythical qualities in both families. Young children grew up hearing about the night their grandfather or father had shown extraordinary courage. The story became part of the family identity, a reminder of the values they held most dear. It shaped how they made decisions, how they treated strangers, and how they thought about their responsibility to others. Years later, when asked what he would tell his younger self about that night in the store, Marcus always gave the same answer. "I would tell him that he did the right thing. I would tell him not to carry shame about it. I would tell him that one moment of courage can create more good in the world than a lifetime of safety and comfort. And I would tell him that 23 years later, on a game show stage, he will finally understand why that moment mattered so much." Robert's answer to a similar question was equally profound. "I would tell my younger self that the man who saved my life would spend years thinking he had not done enough. I would tell myself to search harder, to never stop looking for him. Because every day that Marcus did not know the impact of his courage was a day that he carried an unnecessary burden. People who do good things deserve to know that their goodness mattered." The story of Marcus Morrison and Robert Chen reminds us that heroism is not limited to grand gestures or famous acts. It lives in the small choices we make every day. It lives in the decision to help a stranger, to risk our own comfort for someone else's safety, to stand up when it would be easier to stay silent or walk away. And it reminds us that we may never fully know the impact of our actions, but that should not stop us from acting anyway. In a world that often feels divided and harsh, their story offers hope. It shows that connection is possible across differences, that gratitude can bridge decades, and that goodness, once planted, continues to grow in ways we cannot predict or control. It shows that sometimes the most important moments of our lives are the ones we do not even recognize at the time. So if this story moved you, if it reminded you of the goodness that still exists in the world, if it inspired you to act with courage when your moment comes, then share it with others. Hit that like button and subscribe to our channel because we all need these reminders. We all need to know that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary things, that our choices matter more than we realize, and that sometimes, after many years, we get to see the full beautiful impact of one brave moment. The legacy of that September night in 2001 continues to grow. Every student who receives the Marcus Morrison Courage Scholarship carries forward the values that moment represents. Every person who hears the story and chooses to act bravely in their own life becomes part of the ripple that started with a 17-year-old boy protecting a stranger. And every time the story is told, whether on a game show stage or around a family dinner table, it reinforces the truth that Marcus and Robert both learned. Love is stronger than fear, courage is a choice, and goodness always matters, even when nobody is watching.